Okay. Okay, I think we're going to get started. I'm glad to see people here. We weren't sure what kind of turnout we were going to get because of summer and conflicting things going on. So it's great to see people here. I'm Dennis Thaut, and along with Roberta Foreman, we're going to try to, I was going to say guide us through this, but that would probably be an overstatement of what we'll be able to do today. We're here to facilitate some discussion about the subject today, which is Clobber Verses. And that really opens up a whole conversation about the Bible and context and all of that. What we didn't want to do is get bogged down in oh yeah, I can try. We didn't want to get bogged down on debating context, or we want to talk about context, but not necessarily about language. And I thought it was really appropriate today to during Pastor's message today. I wrote this down. He said, language isn't enough when we're talking about our faith and the language and things that guide us, because language is so complicated. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with language that's used to support sometimes hate, frankly, and we're used in things that could be described in terms of love just as easily, but sometimes those are a matter of choice. So the other thing I wanted to say is, I don't know how many we have online. Okay, so last week wasn't really the most beneficial online experience because of the puzzle thing we did and all that. And so I want to make sure before we get started today that I'll look and see, and I want input from people online. And all of us here have handouts, and I'm not sure if you were able to get those or not, but we'll try to make sure you're more included this time than you were last time, and hopefully that works. So before we get started, then I think Roberta has agreed to lead us in prayer to get started. I think you can do it right there.
Okay. Holy God, hold all of us in this room in your loving arms. Send your spirit upon us to help us in turn share that love with others. Help us to embrace others as we have been embraced, and spread Jesus' message, which is all about love. In the strong name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you. I thought also, this is shows you how much advanced planning I've done, but as I was sitting in church today, I thought it might be important to remind ourselves why we're doing these classes. And our intention is to help us live the welcoming statement that we agreed to when we decided to be an affirming community and an RIC community. And I'll just read that. It says, our Savior is a welcoming community, and we affirm with the Apostle Paul that in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, from Galatians. Christ has made us one. We are committed to extending this welcome to everyone without regard to gender identity, sexual orientation, race, age, socioeconomic status, disability, political association, marital status, education, or ethnic origin. God's reconciling love in Christ is at work in everyone. And I think sometimes we lose sight of what our overall mission is when we get bogged down on details. So today, our Diversity and Inclusion Committee decided it might be appropriate to spend some time talking about some things in the Bible that have been used to marginalize people and to justify hate and to do some really awful things. And our intention is not to argue for or against them, it's to provide some context if necessary, but also to talk amongst ourselves, and hopefully I'll get ideas, we'll get ideas from all of you about how we might, in spite of these verses, be more welcoming. And the other thing we want to know is, have any of you been victims of these, what we're calling clobber verses from the Bible? And how did that make you feel? And how do we respond? So I'm assuming most of you have had a chance to look at the handouts that Tim spent a lot of time on. And I think what might be beneficial is, Roberta, do you want to read the introduction to that at this point? We're just going to read the introduction. We're not going to read everything. We're not going to read all the verses at once, but we'll take our lead from you on what you want to talk about and share some stories. We have some videos I think will be helpful, and then we'll see where that takes us.
Okay, if you have one of these, you can follow along in case I think I should do it. I'll try to mumble clearly. For decades, political and theological debates related to LGBTQ+, what they stand for, issues have centered around same-sex relationships for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. For many Christians, one of the most frequently first asked questions on this topic is, what does the Bible say about attraction to someone of the same sex? Mistakenly, some Christians have suggested that taking the Bible seriously requires people of faith to stand in opposition to the existence, health, and humanity of transgender people. Consequently, gender-expansive people of all demographics and Christian traditions have been made to feel that they must choose between their faith and living a whole, healthy, and authentic life. At the heart of the claim that the Bible is clear, quote, that homosexuality is forbidden by God, end quote, is poor biblical scholarship and a cultural bias read into the Bible. Although it's unlikely that the biblical authors had any notion of sexual orientation, for example, the term homosexual wasn't even coined until the late 19th century. For many people of faith, the Bible is looked to for timeless guidance on what it means to honor God with our lives, and this certainly includes our sexuality. Before we can jump into how it is that Christians can maintain the authority of the Bible and also affirm sexual diversity, it might be helpful if we started with a brief but clear overview of some of the assumptions informing many Christian approaches to understanding the Bible.
So, Roberta, will you remind me what exactly Jesus said about homosexuality in the Bible?
Okay, forgive me if you've heard this before, Terry, but I'm quoting now from Jesus what he has to say about homosexuality.
Okay, I think that's enough. Yeah, it gets complicated. So we've all heard it's in the Bible. I mean, that's a good comeback. It's in the Bible. That seems to justify end the arguments. And we can't really move on before that, after that. And Pastor Deb reminded us this morning. She was saying this is really not a battle you can win if a person's belief system is based on something like that. So we're not trying to win the battle, but we're maybe trying to learn how to talk about it, how to think about it, and how to reflect your values in a way that might impact other people. So I think maybe we should do the first video, the one on It's in the Bible. It's not very long, but I think it's one of the best articulations of this I've heard.
Hi, I'm John Corvino. When it comes to homosexuality, there are some people who think you can find all you need to know right here in the Bible. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. It's true when we look to the Bible, we find some things that sound pretty negative when it comes to same-sex relations. The book of Leviticus says, "Man shall not lie with man as with woman, it is an abomination unto God." Of course, Leviticus also condemns having tattoos or wearing clothing of mixed fiber or eating shellfish. Cotton wool blends, not if you follow Leviticus. Shrimp cocktail, out of the question. The Bible contains things that sound not just odd, but morally troubling. Probably the best example of this is the Bible's approval of slavery. And people say, the Bible doesn't approve slavery. Let's read, shall we? This is from Leviticus, chapter 25, verses 44 to 46. You may acquire male and female slaves from among the aliens residing with you, and from their families that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may keep them as a possession for your children after you, for them to inherit as property. Who says that according to the Bible? God says this according to the Bible. And it's not just the Old Testament. St. Paul in Ephesians says, "Slaves, be obedient to your earthly masters in fear and trembling as you obey Christ." Faced with passages like that, what's a believer to do? Well, one thing you can do is to say the Bible makes mistakes about certain things. That doesn't mean that God makes mistakes, only that human beings may have made mistakes in interpreting God's word. After all, we should not confuse complete faith in God with complete faith in our ability to discern God's voice. And any honest look at history will teach us that. Sorry, Galileo. But some people want to say, but the Bible is infallible. The Bible contains no error. And I say, the Bible contains no error. What are you going to do with those slavery passages? And they say, John, you are pulling those passages out of context. You can't just grab passages from the Bible and assume that the practices they refer to from thousands of years ago had the same meaning and significance then that they do today. You can't pull passages out of context. Okay. But if it's not okay to do that with the slavery passages, why is it okay to do that with the sexuality passages? After all, the biblical authors had a very different understanding of sexuality than we do. For one thing, homosexuality in biblical times was very much associated with certain pagan practices. Probably the best illustration of this comes from Romans 1, the New Testament passage most frequently cited against homosexuality. There, St. Paul talks about non-Jews who exchange the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human being, or birds, or four-footed animals, or reptiles. And then he goes on to say, for this reason, that is, the idolatry, God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way also the men giving up natural intercourse with women, ultimately receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. Now, putting aside what Paul means by unnatural here, although it's worth noting that he says that men who wear their hair long are doing something unnatural, which suggests that for him, unnatural is more about unconventional than immoral. But even putting that aside, the context of the passage, as well as the overall theme of Romans, suggests that his underlying concern here is not homosexuality, but idolatry. And so, to use a passage like this to give us a blanket condemnation of all same-sex relations is kind of like using the slavery passages to endorse 19th century American slavery. If we shouldn't do it in one case, we shouldn't do it in the other. What bothers me here is the inconsistency. Forget slavery for a minute and let's look at another analogy, divorce. The Bible condemns divorce in no uncertain terms. Jesus says that those who divorce and remarry commit adultery. And so anyone in a second or third marriage would be a persistent adulterer. Adultery is a violation of the Ten Commandments. In fact, the Old Testament prescribes death for those who commit adultery. And yet, fundamentalists take a very different attitude toward the thrice married Newt Gingrich or the 4 times married Rush Limbaugh than they do toward same-sex couples, which suggests that they're willing to hold gay people to a rather different standard of biblical literalism than they accept for themselves. The point is that none of us is God. If you're going to take this simplistic, God said it, I believe it, that settles it approach to the Bible, you'd better be prepared to swallow some really difficult conclusions about slavery, about divorce, about women's roles, and so on. If, however, you're going to say, no, we have to look at historical context and approach the text with humility and not forget the larger message of the text, if you're going to do that kind of interpretive stuff, then you ought to be consistent and do it in the case of sexuality as well as these other things. The point is, you can't just fall back on the Bible says so, only when it happens to conform to what you already believe.
We found a picture a classic picture of Jesus.
What do we got going on here? Oh, you're right. I didn't see that part before. I didn't remember that. Interesting.
I want to keep there. It's hilarious.
It's over, and then he had this little,
Yeah.
you know. Ta-da.
Okay, great. So go ahead. You were talking about a t-shirt?
We had a classic picture of Jesus Christ, you know, the long hair and peaceful face, and the words were on the shirt where I didn't say that.
I didn't say that. So, any other reactions to the video, or anybody have any thoughts about biblical literalism?
Well, I can kind of relate. A great grandmother of mine about the divorce thing back in 19 or whatever was, you know, you make your choice and you stick with it when you get married. But she had an abusive husband, and she knew he was a womanizer, and he spent as much time in brothels as he spent at home. But when she got her disease, that was the last straw. So she divorced him, and she was ostracized by her church for having done so. Yeah. So that's, you know, it's the literalistic divorce for the Bible.
When these people that feel that way are so, they complete to me, and I've had experiences where they just completely discount the people in the room that are making those comments about. I was in a Bible study through a non-denominational church, and it just seemed several years back. And the woman that was our hostess was divorced. I was twice divorced, and she just and we weren't even talking that subject, but all of a sudden there was this blanket statement about if you're divorced, you're going to go to hell, and you can't, you know, there's nowhere you want to be able to enter heaven. And I'm sitting there kind of squirming, like, well, just keep it to yourself then. And but I felt really badly for our hostess, because it was very, all of us knew that she was in a second marriage, and I thought, you're in somebody's home here. So my point is that you can have that opinion, and it doesn't matter where you say it. To these people, they just like, it doesn't matter whose feelings you hurt, who's, you know, you're sitting in somebody's home and you put them down just with everybody else. It's just it's okay because that is the rule and that is the law, and everybody else's opinion is incorrect.
So if I heard you right, you listened to it, and it was disturbing. You
I
felt
can never go back.
okay. You felt
I was attending that Bible study regularly on the, I think it was weekly or monthly or bi-weekly or what it was, but I didn't go back. It's like, I don't need to have that dumped on my head.
so. It would disturb you,
Mm-hmm.
and
Personally, you know, it was a personal affront.
you didn't go back. But did you try to respond to them at the moment?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Because that's what we're talking about. If we don't, we just fade off into the sunset.
Yeah. So that's typical, I think.
didn't want to get into that battle. I have a dear friend that has my mantra has always been choose your battle. I thought I do not want to go there.
So what if you're sitting there and you're in a church setting, a Bible study or whatever, and what if you have a child or a relative or a loved one who's struggling with gender identity, who's maybe in their late teens or something, and this is being said, would you have the same response about them being excluded? Would anybody have the same response, or do we generally just be quiet? And why are we quiet? Karen?
I was going to say, you should have been watching TV this morning because Katie Tur was on.
Katie Tur? Yeah.
She was telling about her family and going in helicopters and such, and how wonderful they were. But her dad was always angry when he came home. He was violent, but they kept on because they knew that, you know, he had a job that supported the family. And she had a sister. And finally, he came out and said, he told Katie, he says, I'm a woman.
Oh.
And he went through the whole change. And she doesn't see him changing for 2 years, but she understands why he was always so angry. When he was raising children, married, and such.
Anybody else have experience with?
Mark and Eddie have.
Oh, Mark and Eddie. Okay, glad. Go ahead.
So this was a while ago, but I used to be in carpool situation with this then friend of mine. He's since moved away. But he was involved in an organization that was trying to fix homosexuals and turn them into heterosexuals, because obviously something was wrong with them and they needed the right amount of counseling and nurture and whatnot to change them into how God intended them to be. So when I heard about that, I definitely bristled. And being as we were stuck in this carpool situation, I figured I didn't have anything to lose. So I pretty much tried using those same kind of thoughts that the guy was talking about in the video, quoting stuff from Leviticus, not really quoting, but paraphrasing off the top of my head as best I could, that, you know, you're kind of picking and choosing stuff here. And, you know, why that? And tried to say, well, God created the homosexuals just as he did the heterosexuals. And I think for me, it was really a matter of, in my younger years, I didn't think I knew anybody that was homosexual, so I didn't really need to have an opinion or think about it. It was just, you know, I was living in Wisconsin and Michigan. It's stuff that happened in San Francisco. But as I grew up, I discovered that I had some very good friends that were homosexual, and that made all the difference to me, just knowing someone personally. And so with this carpool guy, I said, you know, do you actually know anybody or that you're aware of? And he said, no. And it was just mind-blowing to me that there was a whole organization associated with this, trying to convert those people. And I know that over time he stopped doing stuff with that organization, but I have no idea if it was because of anything I said or not.
I think you're rare in that you actually said something. Good for you. Good for you.
I won't say I do that in every circumstance, but I was brave in that situation.
You reminded me of, we live in Stanwood, so we used to go to church in Stanwood, and this issue of the church and homosexuality came to the forefront. And one of my friends pulled me aside afterwards because I was trying to speak out. I wasn't very articulate, obviously, but I wasn't impacting anybody's belief system. But he pulled me aside and he says, Dennis, I don't know any gay people. And I said, Dan, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And the fact that you don't think you know them should tell you something about, you know, how they would fear what your reaction might be. I may be wrong, there's people here probably know better, but I think it's estimated that about 15% of our population is non-binary. And that may be a conservative estimate. So it's a significant portion of our population. Everybody knows a gay person. They know more than one gay person. Most of us have some relation, a child or uncle or, father or whatever, who has struggled with this same issue. I remember when our son came out to us, his fear wasn't for us, his fear was how he was going to be treated. And his fears were validated. They were validated. I have a Clobber story. I'll tell that and invite others. I think stories are helpful rather than just reading verses. I think our own personal experiences can inform us and maybe guide us in ways of things that work and things that don't work, with the ultimate goal of being, how can we be more welcoming? How can we, live in a way and talk in a way that makes people feel affirmed and not just tolerated for who they are. In our past church, and I guess it was about 11 years ago when the ELCA had decided to allow gay people to be pastors. In our church didn't like that. And they decided to have a congregational meeting about whether they should leave the ELCA and join a Midwestern synod that was going to hold true to the Bible. So they had a workshop, probably a group of about this many people, and I attended that. Sherry did. I attended it, and so the pastor, and I don't mean this to be mean to him, this is reflective of someone who really believes this stuff, but the pastor got up on the whiteboard and he wrote this horrible verse from Leviticus about conflating homosexuality with bestiality. And he presented that, and I said, that's horrible. I said, I don't believe that. That's awful. And he says, Dennis, it's in the Bible. It's in the Bible. That was his response. And so then others in the room said, were nodding their heads. I was clearly in the minority. And they looked at this one elderly lady there. She was in her 90s. And they said, Grace or whatever her name was, I forget now. And they said, tell us what the Bible says about homosexuals. And she shouted out, it's an abomination. And everybody said, amen. Basically, that was the end of my discussion. I got clobbered. They won. I didn't have any impact on anybody in that room. And I was crushed. We left the church. We left a lot of dear friends that we have not had much contact with since then. So it's sad, but mine was easy. I'm heterosexual, cisgender, and I don't have to fight that battle. I choose to try to fight it on behalf of others, but I can tell you, I haven't persuaded anybody that I'm aware of to change their views. And I'm wondering if anybody else has had that experience. Anything like that?
I'm thinking maybe your son has though.
So what our son did, I don't know if this is helpful or not, is our son moved. As he got older and left college, he moved to New Orleans. Why are you living in New Orleans? He says, I have community there. And if any of you have been to New Orleans, it's a strange place because it's in Louisiana, which is, well, I'll just leave it at that. But he lived there, and we went and visited him there, and then we learned why he lived there. They were affirming, and they cared, and they took care of each other, and they did all of the things that we learn as Christians to do, and they did it outside of a faith community. And I thought, that's terrible that we have created this kind of a system where they don't feel comfortable within in a community of faith. Yeah, that's been our experience. Generally now I'm around people that are more affirming, and it's easier for me, but I don't think that's unusual still. I think that's very difficult.
There's just a lot more awareness of all, the pride movement and all that is making people more aware of what's out there. Today, first I've heard the term cisgender. What does that mean?
Well, cisgender is you're conforming, you're heterosexual.
FIS.
You're going to put me in it.
Yeah.
It's CIF. It's in the bibliography we have is a lot of terms, and so we're going to do that. I think that's the next class, is to be trying to understand some of the terms more, and I'll admit that I make mistakes with them, and I have learned that I shouldn't fear making a mistake. What you should fear is not talking to people or trying to learn, and so that's where I come down on it, and yeah. So I'm doing a lot of talking. Would it be helpful for people to go through some of these verses, or do we need to do that? Or
We had a session like this. I don't know where it was. What's his name? The guy that died.
Rick Privenel?
And we didn't have this all written out, which this is nice, because I was fascinated by it. I was trying to take notes and stuff like that. So I think it was very interesting to me to see what the Bible really said, and how the verses were taken out of context, and not all of them really meant what people tell you they mean. And some of them have been mistranslated into English. Like passage in 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, a man shall die. The word in Greek is asemokoitai, which means like young boys. So it's more about pedophilia and abuse than it is about just a relationship. And cultural practice allowed people to sell their children into slavery, which could include sexual slavery for boys or girls. And some of the pagan practices in the Roman and other Greek cultures were they used ritual sex in their religious practices, and it usually involved young boys. The German Bible does translate it more accurately. Their word is Knabbeschänden, which means boy molester. So again, I don't know. I can't speak for all the languages that have ever been translated, but I know that German is more closely related to the Greek than English.
And we know that translations are difficult because they're translating from a language that had no word for what we're trying to describe. So the editors would insert words they thought best. Like the word homosexual does not appear in the Bible until 1947, I believe. Somewhere in there, the word did not exist. And yet now it's been used to justify I always say hate. It's more than that. It's confusion. It's a lot of different things. Today I watched the news this morning before we came, and what I saw which was disturbing to me, is that in Idaho they arrested a truck full of, I think there was 31 white nationalists dressed in uniform, armed with riot gear, and they were on their way to the Pride celebration in the panhandle of Idaho. Now, that's disturbing on so many levels, but these are Christian organizations. All of them.
So they say, oh, they're claiming to be.
Well, you don't have to,
Claiming to be.
well, you don't have to do anything but claim to be a Christian to be a Christian.
Mhm.
I mean, if you say you're a Christian, I guess you identify as a Christian. I understand what you're saying, but
So they're Christian.
they're doing that under the, they're doing that under the, they're doing that and they're justifying it under the flag of Christianity. And if you ask them, they would tell you what the Bible says about it, because I'm sure they know it. Now, Debbie?
Yeah, I guess for me, I sort the anti-homosexual people into the two categories: the ones that use the Bible as the ammunition against you, and to make their arguments, and the people that find some other reason that they don't like homosexuals. And I guess I have it like many-fold times over less patience with the people that are using the Bible as their reasoning.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think we should show the next video. That's probably the number 2. Do you have it there, Marco?
The Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we done at 10:30? And 45 is when we're done. I'm just trying to be mindful of time.
Hi, I'm John Corvino. The Sodom and Gomorrah story may be the biblical passage most frequently cited against homosexuality. It may also be the least relevant, because it's not clear it has much to do with homosexuality at all. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at the relevant text. Now, let me set the stage a little bit here. Sodom and Gomorrah are very wicked cities. The text doesn't yet specify why. And the Lord is intent on destroying them. But Abraham, whose nephew Lot lives there, intercedes with the Lord so that he might reconsider. So the Lord does what any reasonable deity would do. He sends some visiting angels to investigate. Apparently, traveling angels don't get a per diem, so they're about to camp out in the public square, but Lot comes along and says, no, come crash at my place. And this is where we jump in. So they, the visiting angels, turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called out to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." Now, if we take the word know in a sexual sense there, what do we have? We have the attempted gang rape of visiting angels. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that gang rape is bad. It's bad regardless of the gender of the perpetrators or the victims. Why then do people take this as a story about homosexuality? Even Scripture itself identifies Sodom's sin otherwise. Ezekiel at 16:49 says, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy." In other words, the Sodomites were self-indulgent and callous, not gay. Now, it's true that in the New Testament, written centuries later, the Epistle of Jude refers to the Sodomites as engaging in sexual immorality and pursuing unnatural lust. But the Greek for unnatural lust is literally went after strange flesh, that is, hetero flesh. And even traditionalist scholars recognize that this refers to the human-angel boundary, not to homosexuality. It would be very odd to refer to someone of the same sex as hetero flesh, although I guess it makes sense that sex with angels would be unnatural. But people say, now wait a second, John, you've left out a relevant part of the text. All right, let's press on. So the townspeople are saying, "Bring them out to us so that we may know them." Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg of you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." I want us to pause there and consider what just happened. The townspeople are about to gang rape the visitors. Lot says, "Do not act so wickedly." So presumably he's going to give us an alternative to acting wickedly, which is Rape my virgin daughters instead. What? Lot is supposed to be the good guy in this story. Now you might say, yeah, but he offered them the daughters. They didn't want the daughters. Doesn't that make them gay? No. First of all, if they just wanted another man, they had access to one. Remember, Lot went out of the door, shut it after him. They could have raped Lot, but they didn't. Why? Well, to answer that question, let's look at a very similar story at Judges 19. Here we have a Levite priest and his party visiting Gibeah, and an old man offers them shelter. The townspeople surround the house, start banging on the door, say, "Bring them out to us so that we may know them." And the old man says, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing. Here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now, ravish them, and do whatever you want to them. But against this man, do not do such a vile thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and put her out to them. They wantonly raped her and abused her all through the night into the morning. Now the parallels here are striking. In both cases, you have an angry mob trying to rape visitors, an offer of women, and a refusal of that offer. In this case, however, a woman is thrown out and the mob is apparently sated. What are these stories about? Not same-sex attraction, much less consensual same-sex relationships, but violence and abuse. These are xenophobic mobs trying to humiliate foreigners by sexually violating them. And sadly, we don't have to look very far back to understand this mindset. All of us have heard stories of soldiers in the Middle East and elsewhere trying to humiliate their captives by stripping, fondling, and sodomizing them. And in that sense, using the Sodom and Gomorrah story to condemn homosexuality would be like using the Abu Ghraib prison scandal for the same purpose. It's not about the same thing at all. Now, there are some people who say that the true sin of Sodom is inhospitality. Personally, I think that's a rather weak term for what's going on here. Failing to offer your visitors a beverage after they've traveled a long way to see you, that's inhospitality. Trying to gang rape them is quite another matter. And let's not even mention offering them your virgin daughters, which apparently is biblical good form. The Sodom story is not going to tell us much about homosexuality, but it will teach us about people's tendency to read their prejudices into the text rather than looking at what it actually says.
Wait for it, does it have to wait for it?
No, I'm fine with a beverage.
I didn't see that last part before. Yes. So I didn't realize that the Bible could be such fodder for comedians, but yeah. Any reactions, response to that?
He does bring up, some good points. That what was being demanded in, the Sodom story wasn't, it's not spelled out as being a homosexual desire. It is more, hey, these are not of our tribe, they're strangers, so we're going to do with them whatever we feel like. It doesn't matter, what their gender is. They're not our group, therefore they're nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weapon.
And it said all the men of the city came. No, what, did they have wives at home? Did they know where their guys were going? Well, honey, I'm going out with a guy.
Be sure to use protection. I don't know. Why'd I say that?
Pretty rare.
I know. I told you I shouldn't have come up here to begin with. Yeah, no. So even now in Ukraine, the Ukrainian soldiers are being sexually assaulted. And it's not because they're homosexual. They're using it as a weapon and a form of intimidation And so,
Passports too.
yeah. Yeah.
The story is also a really poor statement of the place of women in society. Here's my daughters, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be hard to imagine being transported in time, especially for a woman to go back in time and have to live like that. Can you imagine? Yeah, the Middle East is, yeah, you can see it in many forms there. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, another thing that comes to my mind, comparing the two stories, that also reinforces the foreigner theme, wasn't the concubine, the concubine belonged to the visitor, so therefore they were willing to rape the concubine, but not the Lot's daughters, because they were part of the community.
Yeah.
And then it was about being foreign.
Yeah, some of the material we have handed out talks about marriage in an interesting way, and how women were really viewed as property, and that would be a reflection of that as well. And that you know, we talk about the sanctity of marriage, and that how we're finding man and woman together to be one. That's not the way original marriage was. It was more contractual, and that especially in Roman times, that you had to marry before you could have kids. Kids were property, women were property, but they didn't have a role that would be specific to their gender, except to be subservient to the patriarchal society that they had created. We still have elements of that, unfortunately, present in our, not only in this world, but also in this country as well. So,
Look the way that America started in the people coming to America. They weren't named, women were not named by their names.
No.
It was just wives and children, nothing.
well, when did women get the right to vote? 1920. 1920, I think it was.
I saw some newspaper clippings in our old church's archives, just women in the church who were honored for something, but none of them had their first names. Mrs. Tom.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
The only ones who had their first name were the ones who were unmarried. Everyone else was Mrs. John somebody. Nicknames.
I'll say the women getting the vote, it depends on which state, because some states recognize women voting. Wyoming was the first state to allow women to vote. I think it was in the 1880s.
Oh, okay.
Where the Constitution probably recognized the women's vote in the 1920s.
So I wrote a question that I don't know if this is the right time for, but I wrote, what, if anything, should we as an affirming faith community do about these conflicts and these barriers to inclusion? And the complicator is that they're embedded in the Bible. How do we address this? So I was educated as a political scientist, so I almost immediately go to the Constitution and amendments and all this, and I thought, oh my God, that would be ridiculous. Having amendments to something that's a book of faith. It's not a book of rules, although it's used as a book of rules. It's a book of values, for certain. But I think about what some churches have done. We've done things to be more inclusive. We've allowed women, listen to me. Yeah. So, but I think that's what it was, though. We were allowing them to become equal. I don't think it was anything more than a kind of a realization that, yeah, that's right.
Ultimately, it was men who had to vote for the women
Yes.
to be allowed to vote.
Yeah.
Did you have, you had to thank for that? That helped.
Yeah. So again, language isn't enough because you can use language any way you want. We have to have values attached to our language, and we have to be able to live, but we have to be able to live it in a way that people can see what your values are. And sometimes it's small things. You know, you might affirm someone that's wearing a button.
I want to say it's like the Second Amendment of the Constitution.
What's that? Second Amendment? I've not heard of that one.
Because most people do not realize it is the right of the individual to be armed for the use of the military,
Militia.
Not that people are allowed to have guns. It just says be armed, and the NRA has taken it to where that you have the right to own any gun, but they don't have any right, but it is, you have to be able to support the militia.
Okay, there's a good parallel there. The NRA does it for what reason? To make money. Why do some of the evangelical churches do the same thing to marginalized communities? I don't think it's part of their theology necessarily. It works for them to attract an audience, and their audience wants to hear that. It's sort of the Fox News of the Bible. I'm going to get in trouble. Yeah. So, you know, we got another comment? Yeah, Mark?
Well, on your point, othering and polarity is a way to get people to sway them to follow you. It gives people power over other people if they can give them an enemy and get them riled up about those people. And it's just a way of getting power, and it's used in many different ways. You know, the issue about homosexuality, the issue about women, guns, abortion. It's just a way to other people and gain power.
So, Mark, do you think that's a learned behavior, or is that sort of an innate human quality that we like to other people?
I just think it's a tool, a technique people learned, I guess.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is what the people around you are believing. Because you see different viewpoints and different control freak type of stuff going on in different people in different regions of the United States, for instance. If you go down in the South, I'm from Oklahoma, and their political and just community views are way different from what the views are up here. And I think part of it is that it just kind of gets soaked into you because you're surrounded with people that even if you didn't feel that way, it grows up, it kind of soaks into you because that's everybody around you or the majority of the people around you have this other view, and some people just finally veer off into that too.
Did you see that change over time? Did it become more inclusive, or?
I lived down there and was fine for a while, and then I wanted to get out of it because it wasn't the way I felt about things. So if I was 45 years old when I finally got out of it and moved up here. And when we moved, we didn't have jobs. We just weren't, and it wasn't just that, but it was the weather too. But it's so different, and there's a little bit of a fracture in my family because if I'm up here and everybody else is still down there, they do not get me at all.
Oh.
I think it's fair.
I need to stay, folks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Go ahead.
And
I'll get you.
I don't know if you want to fix these blogs.
I read it.
But It's fear, and it would be a great fear to understanding other cultures. We can have peace. We can build bridges. And, you know, I really appreciate this because I've done a bit of traveling.
Yes.
And I have really appreciated going into other cultures, learning about them, but also coming home and being happy with what I do. And another thing I'd like to say is that I've met a number of homosexuals, and they are just lovely people. One is a teacher that I taught with. He was the most compassionate teacher, the most outstanding teacher. And we went to his home and met his partner, and you know, it was just beautiful.
So did that normalize it for you?
Yes, and then I have a cousin that has a child that
Yeah.
he was a boy, and now he has become a girl. And you know, and that's fine. But I think that there are people around us that have so many talents and can give to our world. Why don't we just say celebrate that? Celebrate.
Amen. You had a comment back there?
Yeah, kind of off what you said, but I think it's easy to convince people they are better than somebody else. And political groups they get us to be convinced that we are superior to a race or a gender or a sexuality. And people get into this because from childhood, we believe, oh, I just had an A, I want to be the person with an A, or I want to be better than the other kids in the class. And I think it's easy for these people to convince a lot of Americans or people as a whole that they're believing right, and the other people don't get it. And they hold it against anybody they can. I know that's not really coherent what I'm saying, but
No,
I really think politicians use that against us. You know, we give a middle class tax break. We give we're better than the upper class, whatever it is. You just hear these things anytime they're trying to make a group feel better than another group. You got to really take a look at that. You know, what are they trying to do to me here? Someone's trying to convince me something I probably don't believe.
You know, a lot of it is the us versus them idea. You know, and unfortunately, that has been with humanity, since civilization.
Yeah.
I mean, the Crusades were, us versus them. Hitler, he needed, to come up with someone that could be blamed for the problems in Germany. So he blamed the Jews, and that's how he got power. It's happened in, England. It's happened in America. I mean, just about any country. If you have someone who is ambitious enough and can convince other people to blame some smaller or less powerful group in order to build your own power, unfortunately, that's what people will do, and that's kind of what's going on today with a lot of this.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm mindful of the time.
I was going to say, this is not off the subject that anyone's talking about, but because we have the indigenous people here a couple of weeks ago, before colonization, I just Googled it because I couldn't remember the term, but the indigenous people recognize and they call people, they have a third, actually 5 genders in the Native American culture, but they call people that are non-binary two-spirit.
Yes, I've heard that before. Yeah. And what a kind and gentle way to affirm someone for who they are. Yeah.
And most of the time they were honored people for being able to experience or see or, present both sides. And so, they were a lot of the shamans and, very important people in tribes.
When on the reservation I was raised on, in the 50s, I remember a guy, and for years I couldn't even remember his name. I was trying to think what it was. I'll never be able to come up with it. But he was a little odd, you know, I mean, that was kind of just something you saw even as a child, but it wasn't, but he was accepted. He was a part of the community. You know, everybody's related to each other on an Indian reservation, so, you know, he was accepted. He was part of the larger family there. And what did my childhood take on it?
Yeah.
There was nobody was saying bad things about it.
Yeah.
Just one comment about the origin of this prejudice. Is it inborn or is it learned? And I think we have to, there's two sides to every story, and I'm going to kind of take the other side a little bit. In that we have to understand, like Hemingway said in his South Pacific, which was a mid-grade musical, there's a French plantation owner who takes a wife who's Polynesian. And he is asked, why in the world would you, mixed by a white sailor? Why in the world would you do that? And how would you comment on that? And the French plantation owner says, you've got to be carefully taught.
Yeah.
Parents indoctrinate their children.
Absolutely.
From, sit in your chair and use your fork and go to the bathroom and so on and so forth. They're indoctrinated from little infants. And after you're indoctrinated, it's very difficult to think of anything any other way than what your parents raised you and indoctrinated you and groomed you to believe. So those Idaho fellas, I'm from Montana, there's a bunch of them there too. All right, and I was one of them. I was raised in northern Montana, close to an Indian reservation. I didn't see a black person, an African American, until I went down to Mountain Air Force Base as a senior in high school, and there were black Air Force people there. I didn't know what a Jew was until I went off to college and found out, wow, I don't know, I was never taught that. I was taught and indoctrinated by a Methodist family and pastors. So you have to, and I'm not speaking bad about Methodist Baptists, they were all from
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lee. But I think the good news, the sad and good news for what you're saying is that it's learned behavior. We know that.
Yeah.
The good news is it's learned behavior. You can learn differently. And
true, but you have to have patience. It's not going to happen with one conversation.
so I'll close with this, and I'll thank you all for coming. And unless, Roberta, you have anything you want to say right now?
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay. I've said this to a few others before, but I really appreciate having these discussions, and I appreciate watching what's going on, as painful as it is sometimes, in our larger world. And as a little bit of a student of history, I know that humans go through periods of enlightenment. And I think we're on the cusp of a period of enlightenment right now. And I see a few heads nodding. That encourages me. And I may not live to see the fruition of all of that, but I believe that humans are basically loving people and affirming people, and that our enlightenment will guide us to better times. And I think the church has definitely a role to play in that. So thank you all for coming. Next week, I think, is Tim leading the class next week again? And Ellie maybe too, I think, yeah. And it'll be a similar conversation as we're having today. And I do appreciate everybody coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.